Julian Sterling came home unannounced. Nobody knew he was back. The penthouse was silent, the kind of silence that had settled in like dust over the past 3 years. But then he heard something. Sounds coming from somewhere inside. His heart started racing. He didn't know what it was. He moved toward it, following the noise, his hands trembling. It was coming from the living room. He pushed open the door, and what he saw stopped his heart. But to understand how Julian Sterling, one of the most powerful men in tech, ended up standing in that doorway at 1 a.m., frozen by the sound of his own son's laughter, you need to know how he got here. You need to know what broke him. And you need to know why, for 3 years, he'd been running from the one place that should have been home. But before we continue, hit that subscribe button, click like, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because this story will remind you that redemption can happen in the most unexpected moments, and that sometimes the love we need most comes from the places we least expect. Julian Sterling was a billionaire, tech entrepreneur, self-made. He'd built Sterling Connect from nothing, a social media platform that revolutionized how people shared their lives online. What started in a cramped Brooklyn apartment became a company worth $8 billion. He turned algorithms into gold, created features that made his platform indispensable to millions. By 40, he had everything. A penthouse on the 47th floor overlooking Central Park, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Manhattan like a kingdom he'd conquered. A private jet that took him anywhere in the world within hours. Influence that could move markets, change trends, shape conversations. But money couldn't bring back what he'd lost. 3 years ago, Julian's world ended in a delivery room at Mount Sinai Hospital. His wife, Elena, was giving birth to their sons. Triplets. They'd been so excited, so prepared. The nursery was ready. 3 cribs, 3 of everything, painted in soft blues and grays. They'd picked out names, Aiden, Lucas, Mason. They'd spent months preparing for the chaos and joy of raising 3 boys at once. Nobody saw the complications coming. Elena hemorrhaged on the operating table. Massive, unstoppable bleeding. The surgical team worked frantically, doctors shouting orders, nurses running, machines beeping in alarm. Julian stood behind a glass window, watching his wife die in real time while surgeons fought to save the babies. They made a choice in that room. 3 lives or 1. They chose the babies. They saved the triplets. They couldn't save her. Julian held his newborn sons for the first time while his wife's body grew cold in the next room. 3 perfect boys, each weighing just under 5 pounds. Dark hair like his. But their eyes, when they finally opened, were Elena's eyes. Bright, wide, questioning. Aiden, Lucas, and Mason. 3 lives that cost him the only woman he'd ever loved. The nurses tried to celebrate. Congratulations, Mr. Sterling. 3 healthy boys. But all Julian could hear was the silence from the other room. All he could feel was the weight of 3 tiny bodies in his arms and the absence of the one person who should have been holding them with him. He'd never forgiven them for it. His sons. And he hated himself for feeling that way. The boys were 3 years old now, and Julian barely knew them. Something had broken inside them from the very beginning, or maybe it was something that had never formed right in the first place. They were wild, destructive, always testing boundaries like they were searching for something they couldn't name. They'd bite whoever got too close, kick and scream during simple tasks like getting dressed or eating meals, throw tantrums that lasted hours, their small bodies rigid with rage they couldn't express. Julian hired the best help money could buy. Nannies with decades of experience, degrees in early childhood development, recommendations from Manhattan's elite families. Each one lasted a few months, some only weeks, before quitting. 6 nannies in 8 months. They all said the same thing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling, but I can't manage them. They're too much." The boys destroyed their carefully planned activities, threw toys against walls, refused to eat anything but crackers and juice, wouldn't sleep through the night. Margaret, his head of household, found bite marks on the last nanny's arms. The woman had been too afraid to report it. Child psychologists gave it a name, attachment trauma. grief they couldn't express. The boys never knew their mother, one specialist explained, but they feel her absence like a wound. Children are more perceptive than we think. They sense what's missing, even if they can't articulate it. Julian spent millions trying to fix it. Behavioral specialists from the best hospitals in New York and Boston. Therapists who specialized in childhood trauma. A developmental pediatrician from London who came highly recommended. Programs designed specifically for children who'd experienced loss. Nothing worked. The boys stayed locked in their rage, wild together, feeding off each other's chaos like they'd made a pact with pain itself. So Julian did what broken men do. He ran. He buried himself in work. 18-hour days became normal. Back-to-back meetings filled his calendar, board meetings, investor calls, product launches, acquisition negotiations. Singapore 1 week, London the next, Dubai after that. Anything to avoid going home to those three little faces that reminded him of everything he'd lost. Every time he looked at his sons, he saw Elena's eyes staring back at him, accusing him. Why did you let me die? Why am I gone and they're still here? His penthouse became a battlefield he paid others to manage while he conquered the world from conference rooms and private jets. The boys had their wing, 3 bedrooms, a playroom, a private terrace. Julian had his master suite, home office, a gym he never used. Sometimes he'd go days without seeing them, ships passing in a 6,000-square-foot apartment. The penthouse had everything. A chef's kitchen with marble countertops and commercial-grade appliances. Smart home technology that controlled everything with voice commands. Furniture from Italian designers. Art worth more than most people's houses. But it was the loneliest place on earth. Margaret managed the staff, coordinated the nannies, kept the household running. Julian just signed checks and stayed away. Until London. He'd spent 12 months negotiating the acquisition of a European competitor. A deal worth $400 million that would expand Sterling Connect's global reach. 12 months of flights, meetings, compromises, late-night calls with lawyers and investors. The deal was supposed to close that week. Instead, it collapsed in a single conference call. The CEO got cold feet, backed out at the last minute, took a counteroffer from a Chinese firm. Julian sat in his London hotel suite at 2 a.m., staring at his phone, feeling the exhaustion settle into his bones. 3 years of running. 3 years of avoiding home. 3 years of being everywhere except where he was supposed to be. And for what? Another failed deal. Another reminder that he could buy anything except the things that actually mattered. Something inside him cracked. Not broke, just cracked enough to let a sliver of light through. Go home. The thought came from nowhere, quiet but insistent. Just go home. He didn't think about it. Didn't plan it. Just opened his laptop and booked a flight. British Airways, departing in 4 hours. He'd arrive at JFK by midnight. He didn't call ahead. Didn't text Margaret. Just packed his bag and left. When the plane landed, he drove straight to the penthouse, walked through the door at 1 a.m., and expected to find silence. The same terrible silence that had haunted that place for 3 years. But then he heard something, and everything changed. But Julian's unexpected return that night wasn't the beginning of this story. The real beginning happened 8 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon in early autumn, when Margaret finally reached her breaking point. Julian had been home for exactly 47 minutes, just long enough to shower and change clothes between flights. He sat in his home office, laptop open, reviewing acquisition proposals for a startup in Berlin. His flight to Tokyo left in 3 hours. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her expression set in a way Julian had learned to recognize over 15 years. She was about to say something he didn't want to hear. "Mr. Sterling, we need to talk." "Margaret, I'm in the middle of." "Mr. Sterling." Her voice was firm, the kind of firm that had raised 4 children of her own and wasn't about to be dismissed. "I can't do this alone anymore." Julian looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "What happened now? We've gone through 6 nannies in 8 months. Margaret stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. 6. The last one quit this morning. Didn't even give notice. Just packed her things while the boys were having breakfast and left. So hire another one. Julian turned back to his laptop. Use the same agency. Tell them we'll pay more. It's not about the money, sir. Margaret's voice softened, but didn't waver. The boys are getting worse. Aiden gave the last nanny a black eye, throwing a toy truck. Lucas refuses to eat anything except crackers and is losing weight. Mason had a tantrum yesterday that lasted 3 hours. 3 hours, Mr. Sterling. He screamed until he vomited and then kept screaming. Julian's jaw tightened. He didn't look up. What do you want me to do about it, Margaret? I have a business to run. I have 2,000 employees depending on me. I can't just. I want you to let me hire someone different. Margaret crossed her arms. Not another nanny from Manhattan with a fancy resume. Someone who actually understands difficult children. Someone who's been through something and knows what it's like. Julian's fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at the screen without seeing it. Then he exhaled slowly. Fine. Hire whoever you need, Margaret. Just handle it. Mr. Sterling, I have a flight to catch. He closed the laptop, stood up, grabbed his briefcase. Hire whoever you think is best. Send me the contract to sign. I trust your judgment. Margaret watched him walk past her, watched him check his watch, watched him already mentally boarding that plane to Tokyo. Sir, the boys need. They need someone who can manage them. Julian's voice was clipped, final. That's what I'm paying for. That's what you're asking for. So hire them. He was gone before Margaret could finish her sentence. 3 days later, Camila Reyes walked through the door. She was 28 years old, originally from the Bronx, with warm brown eyes and natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a worn leather bag over one shoulder, the kind that had seen years of use, with frayed edges and faded color. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater. No designer labels. No polished Manhattan sophistication. Just a woman with kind eyes and steady hands. Margaret met her in the foyer, immediately sensing something different about this one. Ms. Reyes, thank you for coming. Please call me Camila. Her voice was soft but confident, with traces of a New York accent she'd never tried to polish away. Thank you for the opportunity, Margaret. Margaret walked her through the penthouse, explaining the routine, the boys' schedules, their difficulties. Camila listened carefully, asking questions that showed she was actually processing the information, not just waiting for her turn to speak. I should tell you, Camila said as they reached the boys' wing. I'm finishing my master's in child psychology. I take classes 2 nights a week. If that's a problem, it's not a problem. Margaret actually smiled for the first time in weeks. It might be exactly what we need. She didn't tell Camila everything in that first meeting. Didn't mention that 6 nannies had quit. Didn't share all the gory details of the boys' worst moments. But she did tell her the truth that mattered most. These boys lost their mother the day they were born. Their father is grief-stricken in his own way, though he'd never admit it. They need someone patient. Someone who won't give up when things get hard. And they will get hard, Camila. They will test you in ways you can't imagine. Camila nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. My mother died when I was 16, she said quietly. Cancer. I've been raising my younger sister ever since, putting her through college while working and studying. I understand what it's like to grow up with a hole in your heart shaped like the person who should have been there. She met Margaret's eyes. I won't give up on them. Margaret hired her on the spot. Julian saw Camila exactly once before leaving for Tokyo. He was heading out the door, briefcase in hand, phone pressed to his ear, when she appeared in the hallway carrying art supplies and children's books. She smiled warmly at him, the kind of smile that reached her eyes, genuine and unhurried. He nodded without really seeing her, distracted by the voice on the phone discussing quarterly projections. He registered new nanny, and Margaret handled it, and then he was out the door, into the elevator, into the car, into the plane. Tokyo, Singapore, London. Another deal, another meeting, another city. He never asked her name. The first week was hell. Margaret watched it unfold with a mixture of dread and fascination. The boys tested Camila the way they'd tested every other nanny, but harder, meaner, more destructive. It was like they could sense her goodness and wanted to destroy it before it destroyed them. Aiden threw blocks across the playroom during the first activity she planned. Hard, vicious throws aimed at her head. The other nannies had yelled, threatened timeouts, called for Margaret to intervene. Camila just sat down on the floor and started building towers. When Aiden threw a block at her creation, knocking it down, she smiled and said, "Good aim, buddy. Want to help me build it taller this time, so it makes a bigger crash?" Lucas bit her arm during a meltdown over lunch, actually drew blood, his small teeth sinking into her forearm hard enough to leave a perfect impression. Camila didn't pull away, didn't shout. She just held him gently while the rage worked through his little body, whispering, "I know, baby. I know you're hurting. It's okay. I'm not going anywhere." Mason screamed at her during bedtime, his face red and tear-streaked. "I hate you. I hate everyone. Go away." The words echoed through the penthouse like bullets. Camila knelt down to his level, her voice steady and soft. "That's okay, Mason. You can hate me if you need to. I'm still going to be here tomorrow." They destroyed every activity she planned, refused to eat the meals she prepared, wouldn't sleep when she tried to put them down, tested every single boundary she set. Margaret watched the week unfold, waiting for Camila to quit like all the others. But Camila showed up every single day with the same gentle consistency, the same unwavering presence. She didn't yell, didn't punish, didn't threaten to leave. She just stayed, patient, present, steady as a heartbeat. By the end of the second week, Margaret noticed something. Small things, subtle shifts. Aiden had stopped throwing things at Camila's head. Now he threw them near her, watching to see if she'd still build towers for him to knock down. She always did. Lucas asked for Camila specifically when he woke up from a nightmare. Not Margaret, not the night nurse. Camila. And Mason, wild, angry Mason, let Camila hold his hand for exactly 3 seconds while walking to the playroom. 3 seconds. But it was 3 seconds more than he'd given anyone else in 3 years. Something was happening. Something quiet and fragile and impossibly sacred. Margaret just hoped it would last. Week by week, something miraculous was happening in that penthouse. Something Julian would have never believed if he'd been there to see it. By the end of week 2, Aiden held Camila's hand during their afternoon walk through Central Park. Not just for 3 seconds, for the entire walk. His small fingers wrapped around hers while they watched the ducks in the pond, and when she pointed out a red cardinal in a tree, he squeezed her hand and whispered, "Pretty bird, Mila." It was the first time he'd called her anything other than you or her. That same week, Lucas asked Camila to read him a story before nap time. He brought her The Very Hungry Caterpillar, climbed onto her lap without being asked, and fell asleep against her chest while she read. Margaret found them like that an hour later, Camila still holding the book, Lucas snoring softly, completely at peace. And Mason stopped running away at dinner. He actually came when Camila called him, sat in his chair, and ate 3 bites of chicken without throwing anything. 3 bites. Margaret nearly cried. By week 4, the transformation was undeniable. The boys followed Camila everywhere, little shadows trailing behind her as she moved through the penthouse. They helped her cook, standing on step stools at the counter, cracking eggs and stirring batter with intense concentration. When Camila made silly faces while mixing pancakes, they laughed, actually laughed, the sound bright and pure and achingly beautiful. "When is Mila coming?" became the first question they asked every morning. Not "Where's breakfast?" or "I don't want to." Just "When is Mila coming?" Camila taught them things in ways no one else had managed. She taught them to paint, spreading newspaper across the playroom floor and letting them create wild, joyful messes with their hands. She taught them songs in Spanish, Los Politos Dyson and De Colores, their off-key voices mixing with hers in a chorus of pure delight. Most importantly, she taught them to express their big feelings with words instead of fists. "I'm feeling angry right now," Aiden said one afternoon when his tower of blocks fell over. "That's okay, baby," Camila responded calmly. "Angry is okay. What do you need? Do you need a hug, or do you need to stomp your feet?" "Stomp feet," Aiden decided. And he stomped around the playroom until the anger passed, then came back and built the tower again. By week 6, something shifted that made Margaret's heart catch in her throat. The boys started calling Camila Mila exclusively, not just sometimes, but always. "Mila, watch this. Mila, can we paint today? Mila, I love you." That last one came from Mason during bedtime on a Thursday night. Camila was tucking him in, and he looked up at her with his mother's eyes and said it simply, factually, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. "I love you, Mila." Margaret heard it from the hallway. She pressed her hand to her mouth and walked quickly away before anyone could see her tears. She didn't tell Julian. He called once a week from wherever he was, London, Dubai, Singapore, and their conversations were always the same. "How are things, Margaret?" "Fine, Mr. Sterling. Everything's under control." "The boys?" "They're fine, sir." "Any problems I need to know about?" "No, sir. All handled." He never asked for details. Never asked to speak to them. Never asked about the new nanny, whose name he still didn't know. In his mind, his sons were still those wild, unreachable toddlers, biting, screaming, destroying everything they touched. The idea that they might be healing, that they might be laughing and singing and saying, "I love you" to someone, would have been unthinkable. Julian had no idea his sons were coming back to life. By week 8, the transformation was complete. Margaret watched in amazement as the boys who had terrorized 6 nannies sat quietly at the dinner table, eating the arroz con pollo Camila had made, telling her about their day in complete sentences. "We saw a really big dog at the park," Lucas reported, his fork moving food around his plate like a civilized human child. "He was brown and fluffy, and his name was Bruno. And he licked Aiden's face." Mason added, giggling at the memory. "It was slobbery," Aiden confirmed, making a disgusted face that dissolved into laughter. Camila smiled at them like they'd hung the moon. "Sounds like you guys had the best day." Every single day, the boys drew pictures for Camila. Stick figures holding hands. Hearts in crayon. Houses with 4 people in front, 3 small, 1 tall, all smiling. They'd present them to her like precious gifts, and she'd tape every single one to the refrigerator, the playroom walls, her own bedroom door. The penthouse that had been a battlefield for 3 years was becoming a home. Julian remained completely oblivious. London for the acquisition negotiations. Dubai for a partnership deal. Singapore for an investor conference. Always moving, always working, always anywhere but home. His weekly video calls with Margaret were perfunctory at best. "Everything good?" he'd ask, his face pixelated on the screen, his attention clearly divided between her and his laptop. "Yes, sir. All good. No nanny drama?" "None, sir." "Great. I'll be back. Actually, I'm not sure when I'll be back. There's a situation in London that needs my attention." In his mind, his sons were still broken, still wild, still the constant reminder of everything he'd lost. The idea of going home, of facing them, of sitting in that penthouse surrounded by Elena's ghost, it was unbearable. So he stayed away, and stayed away, and stayed away, until London. 12 months of negotiations. 12 months of flights and meetings and compromises and late-night calls with lawyers. The European acquisition that was supposed to be his crowning achievement, the deal that would expand Sterling Connect into new markets and cement his legacy. It all fell apart in a single conference call. "I'm sorry, Julian," the CEO said, his voice crackling through the speaker. "We've accepted a counteroffer from a Chinese firm. It's just better for our shareholders." Julian sat in his hotel suite, staring at the phone long after the call ended. 2 a.m. in London. Exhausted. Defeated. 3 years of running. And for what? Another failure. Another reminder that he could buy anything except the things that actually mattered. Something inside him cracked. Go home. He didn't think. Just booked the flight. British Airways. 4 hours until departure. He'd be at JFK by midnight. He didn't call ahead, didn't tell anyone, just packed and left. When he walked through the penthouse door at 1 a.m., he expected silence. Instead, he heard laughter, and his entire world stopped. Julian's car pulled up to the building at 12:47 a.m. The doorman, surprised to see him, scrambled to help with his luggage, but Julian waved him off. "I've got it. Go back to your post." He rode the elevator to the 47th floor alone, his reflection staring back at him from the polished brass doors. He looked exhausted, older than 40. The London failure sat heavy on his shoulders, another weight added to the collection he'd been carrying for 3 years. The penthouse was dark when he entered. Silent, exactly as he'd expected. Everyone would be asleep, Margaret in her quarters, the night nurse in the boys' wing, his sons locked in their separate rooms because they couldn't be trusted together after dark. The familiar silence pressed against him like a physical thing, suffocating and cold. Julian set his briefcase down by the door, loosened his tie. He'd pour himself a drink, sit in his study for an hour, try to process the London disaster before attempting sleep. Same routine as always. Come home to an empty penthouse, avoid the parts of it that hurt too much to face, leave again as soon as possible. But then he heard something. Sounds, coming from somewhere deeper in the apartment. Julian froze in the entryway, his hand still on his tie. He stood there, listening, his heart rate picking up. Soft voices, music, and something else, something that made his chest tighten and his breath catch. Children laughing. It couldn't be. His boys didn't laugh like that. Not freely, not joyfully. Not at 1 in the morning. Not ever. Julian moved toward the sound, his expensive shoes silent on the hardwood floors. His hands started trembling. The sounds grew clearer as he walked down the hallway, a woman's voice singing in Spanish, gentle and melodic. And his sons' voices joining in, giggly and off-key, stumbling over words they didn't quite know but singing anyway with pure joy. Light spilled from under the living room door. Warm, golden light that seemed impossible in this cold, dark penthouse. Julian reached the door. His hand hovered over the handle. Part of him wanted to turn around, go to his study, pretend he hadn't heard anything. But he couldn't. He pushed the door open slowly. What he saw inside stopped his entire world. The living room had been transformed. Blankets draped over furniture created a massive fort that took up half the space. String lights hung inside like stars against a midnight sky, casting everything in a soft, magical glow. Pillows were scattered everywhere. A small speaker played music softly, a Spanish lullaby he didn't recognize. And there, in the center of it all, sat a woman Julian had never really seen before. She was cross-legged on the floor in pajamas, soft gray pants, and a white t-shirt, nothing fancy. Her natural hair was wrapped in a silk scarf, deep purple with gold patterns. She looked comfortable, at home, like she belonged there more than Julian had ever belonged in his own space. Aiden was on her lap, his small arms wrapped around her neck, his dark hair messy from play. Lucas and Mason were pressed against her sides, so close they were practically part of her. All 3 boys were in matching dinosaur pajamas, their faces glowing with contentment Julian had never seen before. The woman was reading from a picture book, doing different voices for each character. A high squeaky voice for the mouse, a deep growly voice for the bear. The boys giggled at each voice, completely entranced. And the little bear said, she read softly, her voice like honey and warmth and everything Julian's penthouse had never been. "I love you to the moon and back." "That's what Mila says to us," Mason exclaimed, his face glowing with pure joy. He looked up at the woman with complete adoration. "Every single night," Lucas added, snuggling closer into her warmth, his eyes heavy but fighting sleep because he didn't want this moment to end. Aiden shifted on her lap, looking up at her with his mother's eyes, Elena's eyes, filled with a trust so complete it was almost painful to witness. "Will you stay forever, Mila?" The woman's voice caught. Julian saw her throat work, saw tears glisten in her eyes. "As long as you need me, sweet boy," she whispered, pressing a kiss to Aiden's forehead. "I promise." Julian stood frozen in the doorway. His briefcase had fallen from his hand somewhere behind him. He hadn't even noticed. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was seeing. His sons. His wild, unreachable, broken sons. The boys who bit and kicked and screamed, who'd driven away 6 nannies in 8 months, who destroyed everything they touched. They were transformed. Peaceful. Happy. Loved. They looked nothing like the children he'd left behind 8 weeks ago. They looked like children who had a mother. For 3 seconds, maybe less, something broke open inside Julian's chest. Relief so powerful it felt like his ribs might crack under the pressure. Gratitude. Joy. A feeling he hadn't felt since Elena died. Like maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten them. Like maybe his sons weren't broken after all. Like maybe there was hope. Then Mason laughed and said, "Mila, tell us again about when Mama was in heaven and sent you to us." And something shifted. Julian didn't understand it. Couldn't name it. But it rose up fast and hot and ugly. Jealousy. Shame. Rage. This woman, this stranger whose name he didn't even know, had done what he couldn't. She'd brought his sons back from the dead. While he was building his empire, closing deals, conquering the business world, she was here. Building his family. Healing the wounds he'd left behind. Being the parent he should have been. His sons loved her. Completely, wholly, without reservation. They loved her the way they should have loved him. The way they'd never loved him. Because he'd never been here. Never tried. Never showed up. And he hated her for it. Hated her for succeeding where he'd failed. Hated her for making it look easy. Hated her for being everything Elena would have been if Elena hadn't died giving birth to these 3 boys who cost him everything. What the hell is going on here? His voice exploded into the room like a grenade, shattering the peace into 1,000 irreparable pieces. The singing stopped instantly. The joy that had filled the room vanished like someone had flipped a switch, sucked out all the air, and replaced it with ice. Aiden's face crumpled. Lucas and Mason froze, their bodies going rigid against Camila's sides. All 3 boys stared at their father with wide, terrified eyes, like they'd been caught doing something terrible instead of something beautiful. Camila carefully lifted Aiden off her lap, her hands shaking as she set him down gently on the pillows. She stood slowly, smoothing down her pajama pants, her voice steady despite the tremor Julian could see running through her body. "Mr. Sterling, I can explain. This is completely inappropriate." Julian's voice cracked with rage he couldn't control, didn't want to control. "You were hired as a nanny, not to play house with my sons at 1 a.m. Camila's eyes met his, calm and clear despite the tears gathering there. "The boys had nightmares, sir. All 3 of them. I was just comforting them. Nightmares." Julian gestured wildly at the fort, the lights, the cozy scene that had been so perfect before he destroyed it. By building forts and having midnight parties? By putting ideas in their heads about their mother sending you from heaven. "Mr. Sterling, this is dangerous." His voice rose higher, louder. The boys flinched with each word like they were physical blows. "This is unprofessional. You've completely crossed every boundary. What if something happened? What if one of them got hurt playing in this mess?" "Nothing happened, Mr. Sterling." Camila's voice remained steady, though Julian could see her hands clenching at her sides. "I was being careful. I would never let anything happen to them. I don't want to hear it." Julian's face was red, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "I don't want your excuses or your explanations. You're manipulating my children, making them dependent on you, turning them against me. Sir, that's not. You're fired." The words came out cold. Final. Like a door slamming shut. Camila stood there for a long moment, tears now spilling down her cheeks. But she didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't try to defend herself or change his mind. She just nodded slowly, her dignity intact even as her heart broke. "Yes, sir." She turned to the boys, kneeling down so she was at their level. Aiden had started crying, silent tears streaming down his face. Lucas and Mason were frozen, holding each other's hands so tight their knuckles were white. Camila reached out, touching each of their faces gently. "I love you," she whispered, her voice breaking. I love you so much. Be brave, okay? Be brave for me. Mila, no, Aiden whimpered, reaching for her. Don't go. Please don't go. I have to, baby. Camila pulled all three of them into a fierce hug, holding them tight for one last moment. But I'll never forget you. Never. You're the bravest, strongest, most amazing boys in the whole world. The boys clung to her, crying silently now, the way they'd cried for 3 years before she arrived. The way Julian had thought they'd stopped crying forever. Camila gently untangled herself from their desperate grip. She stood, wiped her eyes, and walked past Julian without looking at him. Her head was high, her shoulders straight. She walked out of the living room with the same dignity she'd carried into it 8 weeks ago. Julian heard her footsteps fade down the hallway, heard the door to the staff quarters close softly. In 30 minutes, she'd be gone, disappeared from their lives as quickly as she'd appeared. The boys stood in the destroyed fort, surrounded by blankets and string lights and the picture book still open on the floor. They didn't move, didn't make a sound. Their faces had gone completely blank, that terrible emptiness Julian recognized from the first 3 years of their lives. They looked at their father, really looked at him, and Julian saw something in their eyes that made his stomach drop. Fear. They were afraid of him. Aiden's lip trembled, but no sound came out. Lucas and Mason held each other tightly, their small bodies pressed together like they could protect each other from whatever was coming next. They'd seen their father destroy the one good thing in their lives, and now they knew. Now they understood that happiness wasn't safe. That love could be ripped away in seconds. That the person who should protect them was the person they needed protection from. Then slowly, still holding hands, they walked out of the room. Their bare feet padded softly against the hardwood floor. They didn't look back, didn't say goodnight, didn't say anything. Just disappeared down the hallway toward their bedrooms like 3 little ghosts. Julian stood alone in the living room. The string lights still glowed softly, casting gentle shadows across the blanket fort. The picture book lay open to the page where the little bear said, I love you to the moon and back. The speaker still played that Spanish lullaby, soft and achingly beautiful. His hands started shaking. Then his legs. He grabbed the edge of the couch to steady himself, but it wasn't enough. He sank down onto the floor, surrounded by pillows and blankets, and the evidence of joy he'd just destroyed. What did I just do? His voice came out barely a whisper. What did I just do? The penthouse didn't answer. It just settled back into silence. The same terrible silence that had haunted these walls for 3 years. Cold, dead, empty. Julian had spent 8 weeks in London, Dubai, Singapore, building his empire, chasing deals, running from grief. And in those 8 weeks, someone had brought his sons back to life. And it took him exactly 3 minutes to kill them again. He sat there on the floor as the lullaby played on, as the string lights glowed softly above him, as the silence pressed in from every corner. And for the first time since Elena's funeral, Julian Sterling understood the full weight of what he'd become. Not a father, a destroyer. Julian sat alone in his study. The room was dark except for the lamp on his desk, casting harsh shadows across walls lined with awards and accolades that suddenly meant nothing. A glass of whiskey sat in his hand, untouched, the ice slowly melting into amber liquid he had no desire to drink. His eyes were fixed on the photo on the shelf. Elena, laughing, holding 3 tiny newborns wrapped in blue blankets. All 3 of them cradled in her arms during the brief moments between their birth and her death. Her smile was so bright it hurt to look at, so full of joy and hope and a future that would never happen. What have I done, Elena? His voice cracked in the silence. What have I done? The photo didn't answer. It just stared back at him with Elena's frozen smile, accusing him from beyond the grave. There was a soft knock at the door. Julian didn't turn around. Go away, Margaret. No, sir. The door opened anyway. Margaret stepped inside, closing it firmly behind her. She didn't bring tea this time, didn't sit down, just stood there with her arms crossed, looking at him the way a mother looks at a child who's done something terribly, unforgivably wrong. They were different, Mr. Sterling. Julian looked up, confusion cutting through his guilt. What? Your sons? Margaret's voice was quiet but firm. They were different, completely transformed. Julian's jaw tightened. I know that, Margaret. I saw them tonight. That woman had them completely. No. Margaret shook her head. You don't understand. It wasn't just tonight. They've been different for 8 weeks. The glass slipped from Julian's hand. It didn't shatter, just tipped over on the desk, whiskey spilling across the polished wood, soaking into papers and spreading like a stain. Julian didn't move to clean it, just stared at Margaret as her words sank in. 8 weeks. Yes, sir. Margaret stepped closer, her expression unwavering. Full sentences. Artwork. Singing songs. Eating dinner without tantrums. Playing together without violence. Cooperation. Joy. Ms. Reyes brought them back little by little, every single day. Julian's hands started shaking. 8 weeks. 8 weeks, and he couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't process it. How? Why didn't anyone tell me? Margaret's voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any shouting could have. You were never here to tell, Mr. Sterling. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. Julian covered his face with his hands, his shoulders hunching forward. Oh God, Margaret. I destroyed it. I destroyed everything in 10 seconds. Yes, sir. Margaret didn't soften her tone, didn't offer comfort. You did. The words hung in the air between them. No excuses. No consolation. Just truth, raw and unforgiving. Julian's voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. What kind of father am I? My sons were healing, actually healing, and I had no idea. I've been so busy running from this place, from them, from everything that I didn't even notice they were coming back to life. Margaret stepped closer to the desk, her arms still crossed. Mr. Sterling, do you understand what you did tonight? Julian looked up at her, his eyes red, his face aged 10 years in the past hour. Those boys trusted Ms. Reyes, Margaret continued, her voice quieter now but no less powerful. They opened up to her. They let themselves be vulnerable, let themselves love and be loved. And you showed them that when you're scared or confused, you hurt the people they love. You taught them that happiness isn't safe. That love can be destroyed in seconds. I wasn't thinking. Julian's voice was raw. I saw them so happy with her. I saw the way they looked at her, the way they said I love you to her, and I felt, he paused, the admission painful. I felt like I didn't matter anymore. Like I'd been replaced. Like some stranger walked into my house and became a better father than I could ever be. So you destroyed it? Margaret's question was simple, direct. Julian closed his eyes. Yes. The word came out barely a whisper. I destroyed it. Silence filled the study. The whiskey continued spreading across the desk, dripping onto the expensive carpet below. Julian could hear his own heartbeat, loud and irregular in his chest. She was patient with them, Margaret said softly. She never raised her voice, never threatened to leave. She just showed up every day and loved them exactly as they were. She taught them to paint, to sing, to express their feelings. She held them when they had nightmares. She celebrated every tiny victory like it was a miracle. Margaret's voice caught. And it was a miracle, Mr. Sterling. It was a miracle, and you just killed it. Julian looked down at his hands, stained with whiskey, trembling. What have I become, Margaret? A man who's so afraid of his own grief that he destroys everyone else's healing. The truth of it was unbearable. Julian thought of his sons' faces, the fear in their eyes when they looked at him. The way they'd gone silent again, that terrible emptiness returning like a light being switched off. 3 years of trauma, 8 weeks of healing, and he'd destroyed it all in minutes. What are you going to do now? Margaret's question hung in the air. Julian stared at Elena's photo, at her smile, at the 3 babies she'd died to bring into the world. He'd failed her, failed their sons, failed the woman who'd actually managed to reach them when he couldn't. I don't know, he whispered. I don't know if I can fix this. Maybe you can't, Margaret said quietly. But you owe it to those boys to try. She turned and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. Ms. Reyes will be gone by morning, and your sons will be back to where they were 3 months ago, silent, angry, and alone. The question is, Mr. Sterling, will you finally be here for them, or will you run again? She left him sitting there in the dark, surrounded by his accomplishments, drowning in his failures, with only Elena's photo to bear witness to what he'd become. Julian didn't sleep. He sat in his study until dawn broke over Central Park, the city coming alive outside his windows while everything inside him felt dead. At 7 a.m., he showered, put on a fresh suit, and asked Margaret to have Ms. Reyes come to his office. "She's packing, sir," Margaret said quietly. "She'll be gone within the hour. Tell her I need to speak with her. Please." Margaret studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll ask." 20 minutes later, Camila entered his office. She moved quietly, her head slightly lowered, hands clasped in front of her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her own clothes, not the uniform she'd worn while working. She carried the same dignity she did last night when she walked out of the living room, but something in her eyes had changed. The warmth was gone. The hope. What remained was polite, professional distance. Julian gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down." Camila sat on the edge of the chair, back straight, waiting. Julian cleared his throat. The words felt inadequate before he even spoke them, but he had to try. "Ms. Reyes, I want to apologize. What I said last night, how I spoke to you, was completely out of line." Camila said nothing, just watched him with those calm, clear eyes. "I didn't know the boys had been doing so well. Margaret told me about the past 8 weeks. About everything you did for them." His voice faltered. "I was wrong." Silence stretched between them. Camila's expression didn't change. "You weren't being inappropriate," Julian continued, the words coming harder now. "You were caring for them in a way his voice caught. In a way I couldn't. And I'm truly sorry." Camila looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "May I speak freely, Mr. Sterling?" "Of course. Please." She took a slow breath. "You didn't just fire me last night. You humiliated me. In front of 3 little boys who trusted me, who loved me." Julian winced, but didn't interrupt. "You showed them that people like me don't matter," Camila continued, her voice steady despite the pain underneath. "That when you're confused or scared, you hurt people. You punish them for caring. You destroy what's good because you don't know how to handle it." "Ms. Reyes, I'm not finished." Her voice was quiet but firm. Camila stood, and Julian saw her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "I know my place, sir. I'm the nanny. I help with homework and make dinner and clean up messes. I'm not family. I'm not their mother. I know that. But those boys..." Her voice cracked just slightly. "They became my heart. Every single day for 8 weeks, I showed up and loved them. I celebrated when Aiden held my hand. I cried the first time Lucas asked me to read him a story. I thanked God every night that Mason was learning to use his words instead of his fists." Tears gathered in her eyes but didn't fall. "And you broke that in front of them. You showed them that the person they loved, the person who made them feel safe, could be thrown away in seconds. That their happiness didn't matter. That I didn't matter." Julian stood, moving around the desk. "Ms. Reyes, please." "I'm not coming back, Mr. Sterling." Camila's voice was final. "Not because you fired me. Not even because you humiliated me. But because I can't stay in a place where love gets punished. Where caring for children is treated like a crime." She walked toward the door, her back straight, her dignity intact. Julian followed, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please. My sons need you." Camila stopped, her hand on the doorknob. She turned slowly, looking at him one last time. "Your sons need their father, Mr. Sterling. Maybe start there." Then she was gone. Julian stood in his office doorway, staring at the empty hallway. He could hear her footsteps fading, hear the door to the staff quarters open and close. In minutes, she'd be in the elevator. In an hour, she'd be gone from their lives completely. He sank back into his desk chair, his head falling into his hands. An hour later, Margaret found him still sitting there, staring at nothing. She's not coming back, is she? Julian's voice was hollow. No, sir. Margaret's tone was gentle but honest. She's not. Julian slammed his fist on the desk, making papers jump. I know, Margaret. I know I ruined everything. I know it's my fault. I know, his voice broke. Margaret crossed her arms, studying him. Then she said quietly, then go after her. Julian looked up. What? Go after her, Margaret repeated. The same way you chase your business deals. With humility. And speed. She said no. She made it very clear. She said no to coming back to work for a man who punishes love. But maybe, Margaret paused, choosing her words carefully. Maybe she'd say yes to helping a father who's finally ready to fight for his sons. Julian stared at her. You think she'd listen? I think she loves those boys enough to consider it. If you show her you're serious. If you prove you've actually changed. Julian stood slowly, something shifting in his chest. Not quite hope, but maybe the shadow of it. Where does she live? Margaret hesitated, then pulled out her phone. The Bronx. I'll text you the address. Julian grabbed his jacket, already moving toward the door. Then he stopped, turned back. The boys. I'll stay with them, Margaret said. Go, Mr. Sterling. And don't come back until you've done everything you can to make this right. Julian nodded once, then left. For the first time in 3 years, Julian Sterling was running toward something instead of away from it. Julian drove to the Bronx that afternoon in his Tesla, the navigation taking him through neighborhoods that got progressively less familiar. Manhattan's gleaming towers gave way to Brooklyn's brownstones, then to the Bronx's grittier streets. The address Margaret had given him led to a modest apartment building on a narrow street, cracked sidewalk, faded paint peeling from brick walls, a bodega on the corner with security bars on the windows. It was a world away from Central Park. Julian parked on the street, feeling conspicuous in his tailored suit and $1,000 shoes. A group of teenagers on the corner watched him get out of the car, their expressions skeptical. He locked the Tesla, heard the beep echo in the street, and walked toward the building. The entrance door's lock was broken. Julian climbed 3 flights of stairs, the stairwell smelling of cooking spices and old carpet. Apartment 3C. He stood outside the door for a long moment, his hand raised to knock, his heart pounding harder than it had in any boardroom. He knocked. Footsteps approached. The door opened a crack, chain still attached. A young woman peered out, early 20s, with Camila's eyes but sharper, more suspicious. She looked Julian up and down, taking in the expensive suit, the polished shoes, the desperation he couldn't quite hide. Her jaw tightened. Yeah, I'm looking for Camila Reyes. Does she live here? The woman's expression hardened immediately. Who's asking? My name is Julian Sterling. I was her employer. I need to speak with her. You're the guy who fired her. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Julian's throat tightened. Yes, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I need to apologize. The young woman, Sophia, he assumed, the sister Camila was putting through college, stepped closer to the crack in the door, her voice low and fierce. You made her cry, man. She came home at 2 a.m. sobbing. She loved those kids. She talked about them every single day. And you embarrassed her in front of them. Made her feel like nothing. Julian flinched. I know I hurt her. That's why I'm here. And now you show up here thinking you can just fix it. Sophia's voice was sharp with protective anger. Like you can throw some money around and make it okay? That's not how this works. I'm not here to throw money around. Julian's voice was quiet, honest. I'm here because I destroyed something precious, and I need to try to make it right. Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Sophia studied his face for a long moment, searching for something, sincerity, maybe, or genuine remorse. Whatever she saw must have been enough, because she finally called over her shoulder. Camila, there's someone here for you. Who is it? Camila's voice came from deeper in the apartment. The billionaire. Silence. Then footsteps. Slower this time. Hesitant. Camila appeared behind her sister in the doorway. She wore yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her eyes were red and swollen. She'd been crying recently. When she saw Julian, her entire body went still. Her face closed off, protective walls slamming into place. "What do you want, Mr. Sterling?" "To talk. Please." "There's nothing to talk about." Camila's voice was flat, emotionless. "You made yourself very clear last night. Ms. Reyes, I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt you." Julian took a breath, forcing himself to say what he'd come to say. "But my sons, they haven't been the same since you left." Camila's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. "They've gone back to how they were," Julian continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Violent, silent, destructive. This morning, Aiden threw a plate across the kitchen. Lucas bit Margaret when she tried to help him get dressed. Mason locked himself in his room and won't come out." He paused, the words painful. "I destroyed the only good thing that's happened to them since their mother died." Camila's expression flickered, pain, longing, then hardness again. "That's not my responsibility, Mr. Sterling." "I know." Julian's voice was raw. "I know it's not. But I'm not here as your boss. I'm not here as the man who fired you. I'm here as a father who failed his children, who's been failing them for 3 years. And I'm begging for help." He reached into his jacket pocket, his hands trembling, pulled out a small cardboard box, the kind that might hold jewelry or precious keepsakes. "The boys made this. Margaret found it hidden in their playroom this morning." Camila hesitated, her hand hovering in the air. Then slowly, reluctantly, she took the box. She opened it carefully. Inside were 3 drawings, carefully folded. Camila unfolded them one by one, her hands beginning to shake. Stick figures holding hands, labeled in uneven letters, "Mila and us." A heart colored in with red crayon. For Mila, written across the top. A sun with rays reaching all the way to the edges of the paper. 3 small figures standing beneath it, smiling. Beneath the drawings was a folded piece of paper. Camila unfolded it, and Julian saw her face crumple. Words written in crayon, big and uneven, each letter formed with careful concentration. "Please come back. We love you, Mila." All 3 boys had signed their names at the bottom. Aiden's A was backwards. Lucas had drawn a heart next to his name. Mason's letters were so big they barely fit on the page. Camila's hand went to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks, landing on the paper, making the crayon blur slightly. "They drew these for you," Julian said quietly, his own voice thick. "Every night before bed. Margaret found them under Aiden's pillow this morning. He's been sleeping with them, keeping them close." Camila clutched the box to her chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sophia put a hand on her sister's back, her own eyes wet now. Julian took a step closer, his voice breaking completely. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Ms. Reyes. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm asking you to save them. Because I can't. I've tried for 3 years, and all I've done is make everything worse. But you," his voice caught, "you loved them back to life in 8 weeks. And I destroyed that in 8 minutes." Camila looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, her eyes filled with pain and love and impossible conflict. "Please," Julian whispered. "Please." Camila stood there in the doorway, holding the box of drawings against her heart, torn between the pain of what he'd done and the love she still carried for 3 little boys who needed her. And Julian waited, knowing that whatever she decided in this moment would determine whether his sons had any chance at healing, or whether he'd destroyed them forever. Camila looked down at the drawings clutched against her chest, then back up at Julian. Her voice came out thick with emotion, raw and honest. "Mr. Sterling, Julian, what you did hurt. Not just me. Them. I know." Julian's voice was barely a whisper. "You made them feel like loving me was wrong. Like being happy was something to be ashamed of." Tears continued streaming down her face. "You taught them that the people they love can be ripped away in seconds. That joy is dangerous." Julian's throat tightened, his own eyes burning. "I was angry at myself, not you. I saw them whole again and I realized." His voice broke completely. "I realized a stranger had done what their own father couldn't. And instead of being grateful, Instead of thanking God for the miracle of it, I destroyed it. Camila wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Do you understand what it took for those boys to trust me? To open up? Julian shook his head, unable to speak. They'd been acting out for 3 years, Camila continued, her voice steady despite the tears. 3 years of pain and confusion and grief they couldn't express. And in one moment, one angry, selfish moment, you taught them that people leave. That love isn't safe. That happiness can be destroyed by the person who's supposed to protect them. I'll spend the rest of my life making that right. Julian's voice cracked. I swear to you. I swear on Elena's memory, on everything I have, I'll make this right. Sophia stepped closer to her sister, her hand on Camila's shoulder. Camila, you don't owe him anything. You don't owe him a second chance. I know. Camila's voice came out barely a whisper. She looked down at the drawings again, at the stick figures holding hands, at the backwards A in Aiden's name, at the plea written in crayon. But I owe them. She looked back at Julian, her eyes meeting his directly. If I come back, and I mean if things change completely. Anything. Julian stepped closer. Name it. Whatever you need. You can't keep working 18-hour days. You can't keep flying across the world every other week while your sons grow up without you. Camila's voice was firm now, stronger. If I'm going to help them heal, you have to be part of it. Really part of it. Julian nodded quickly. I'll restructure everything. Work from home. Cut back on travel. I can delegate more, hire. I'm not talking about cutting back, Mr. Sterling. Camila's eyes were steady, unwavering. I'm talking about showing up. Being there for breakfast. For bedtime. For the hard days when they cry and don't know why. For the good days when they want to show you a bug they found or a picture they drew. She stepped closer. You can't fix this from a distance. You can't throw money at it or delegate it to me or anyone else. Those boys need their father. Not your bank account. Not your name. You. I understand, Julian said. Do you? Camila's voice cut through his certainty. Because I won't come back just to watch you break their hearts again. I won't be the one holding them while they cry for you. I won't be the substitute for what they really need. Julian felt the weight of what she was asking settle over him. His entire life had been built around work, around success, around control. Sterling Connect was his identity. The deals, the acquisitions, the constant motion, that was who he was. She was asking him to let it go. To become someone completely different. I don't know if I know how to do that, he admitted quietly, the confession painful. I don't know how to just stop. How to be still. How to be enough without the work. Camila's expression softened slightly. Then you learn the same way those boys are learning to trust again. One day at a time. One breakfast at a time. One bedtime story at a time. Silence settled between them. Sophia watched her sister carefully. Julian stood there, feeling stripped bare, all his money and power meaning nothing in this shabby hallway in the Bronx. If you come back, Julian said slowly, choosing each word carefully, I'll be there. I promise you. Whatever it takes. Camila studied his face, searching for something. Truth, sincerity, genuine change. Julian forced himself to hold her gaze, to let her see everything. His failure, his desperation, his fragile hope. Finally, she nodded. 1 week. Give me 1 week to think about it. Ms. Reyes. 1 week, Mr. Sterling. Her voice was final. That's all I'm asking. If you really mean what you're saying, you can wait 7 days. She held out the box of drawings. Keep this. Show it to the boys. Tell them I saw it. Her voice caught, fresh tears spilling. Tell them I miss them too. Julian took the box, held it carefully like the precious thing it was. Then he nodded and turned to leave. Mr. Sterling? Camila called after him. He turned back. Those boys are worth fighting for. Don't forget that when it gets hard. I won't, Julian promised. I won't. 1 week later. Camila stood outside the penthouse building, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Margaret had texted her that morning. They've been waiting by the window since sunrise. Come home, Ms. Reyes. Home. The word felt impossible and perfect at the same time. She rode the elevator to the 47th floor, her hands shaking. Margaret was waiting at the door, tears already in her eyes. "They've been asking every 5 minutes if you're really coming," Margaret whispered, hugging her tight. "Go on." They're in the living room. Camila walked through the hallway, each step feeling momentous. She could hear Julian's voice coming from the living room. He was reading a story, his tone gentle, but the boys weren't responding. The silence was painful to hear. She paused at the doorway. Julian saw her first. He was sitting on the couch with a picture book in his lap, all 3 boys arranged around him, but separate, not touching him, their bodies stiff. His eyes met hers, and he nodded once, gratitude and relief written across his face. The boys hadn't noticed her yet. They stared at the book without seeing it, their faces blank. "Mila." Aiden's voice came out barely a whisper. He'd turned, seen her standing there. "Mila." Lucas and Mason simultaneously, their voices breaking. All 3 of them ran. They crashed into her so hard she almost fell backward, but she caught them, wrapped her arms around all 3, and held on tight. They were crying, talking over each other, their words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "We thought you were gone forever. We missed you so much. Daddy said you were coming, but we were scared you wouldn't. I'm here, babies." Camila sank to her knees, pulling them closer. "I'm here. I missed you every single day. Are you staying?" Aiden pulled back just enough to see her face, his cheeks wet with tears. "You're not leaving again? Promise." Camila looked up. Her eyes met Julian's across the room. He was still sitting on the couch, tears streaming down his face, making no effort to hide them. He nodded once, a promise. Camila looked back at the boys. "I'm staying. I promise." "Forever?" Mason asked, his voice small. "As long as you need me, sweet boy. As long as you need me." Mason buried his face in her shoulder. "We love you, Mila. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. All of you. So much." Julian watched from across the room. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't try to insert himself into the moment. He just watched his sons come back to life in someone else's arms. And for the first time, he wasn't jealous. He was grateful. Because this was love. Real love. The kind that doesn't demand center stage. The kind that celebrates healing wherever it comes from. 6 months later, Julian Sterling's life looked nothing like it had a year ago. He worked from home 3 days a week now. No more 18-hour days. No more constant international travel. He'd promoted his COO to handle day-to-day operations and stepped back from the relentless pace that had defined him for years. He knew his son's preschool teachers by name. Knew their friends, Oliver who loved dinosaurs, Emma who shared her snacks, Carlos who made them laugh. He knew the songs they made up, the games they invented, the way Aiden's face scrunched when he was thinking hard. He was there for breakfast every morning, making pancakes alongside Camila, letting the boys crack eggs and make messes. There for dinner every night, hearing about their days. There for bedtime stories, reading the same books over and over because Mason loved the rhythm of familiar words. There for bad dreams, holding Lucas when he woke up crying, whispering that he was safe. There for good days, celebrating when Aiden finally rode his bike without training wheels. He showed up, and slowly, painfully, beautifully, his sons began to trust him again. Camila wasn't just the nanny anymore. She was family. The boys called her Tia Mila, Aunt Mila, and she'd become as essential to their lives as breathing. One Saturday evening in October, they were in Central Park flying kites. The boys ran ahead, their laughter echoing across the great lawn, their kites dancing against the amber sky. Julian and Camila walked behind, keeping them in sight but giving them space. "Thank you," Julian said quietly, "for not giving up on them. On us." Camila smiled, her eyes on the boys. "Thank you for finally showing up. Daddy, look." Aiden ran back, his face glowing. "My kite is the highest." Julian knelt down, pulled him close. "I see it, buddy. You're doing amazing." Lucas and Mason ran over too, joining the hug, all 3 of them talking at once about whose kite was best, whose went highest, whose did the coolest tricks. Julian held them, breathing in the moment, grass and autumn air, and the sweet smell of his son's hair. He looked up at Camila over their heads, mouthed, "Thank you." She shook her head gently, her eyes wet. "No, thank God." Julian understood. This wasn't about him or Camila or even the boys. It was about grace, the kind that shows up when you're broken, the kind that reaches into chaos and pulls out peace, the kind that doesn't give up even when you've given up on yourself. As the sun set over Central Park, the kites dancing in the golden light, Julian felt something he'd thought was gone forever. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because the grief was gone or the past was erased, but because he was finally where he was supposed to be. Present. Grateful. Home.
True wealth isn't what you build, Julian realized. It's who you become. And the most valuable thing in this life isn't success or money or power. It's love that stays. Even in the darkness, even in the chaos. The love that stays. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Matthew 16 verse 26. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you found it enjoyable, you'll definitely appreciate the next one. It's even more captivating and full of surprises. Simply click the image on your screen to continue watching.